I need to put a little disclaimer here. I was actually not going to post this video. I was worried about what people would think, especially those actively going through benzo withdrawal. I want to be really clear about something. While in this specific moment I feel worse than I did over a year ago, when I step back and look at the big picture, I can say unequivocally that I am better than I was last year, in magnitudes better than a year before that. The transparency has always been very important to me with this channel, and I need to talk about this other thing that's been going on, particularly because there are so many similarities with benzo withdrawal. Some of you may be having the same experience. I also want to stress that while I reference supplements and antihistamines in this video, there are many other approaches to MCAS treatment, including many natural remedies and practices, like neural retraining, EMDR, even breathing exercises. Some of these I actively use. There are others that I still need to try. It's July 22nd, 2025, and 9 days ago marked 3 years that I've been off benzodiazepines. And that's normally an anniversary that I would have acknowledged here on this channel. I would have made a video about it. And I did not because I was feeling quite lousy. In the previous video I published on this channel, I talked about feeling not fantastic. And there's been some marginal improvement, but not to the point that I wanted to make a video. But I felt well enough to come up on the roof and talk to you guys today, because I think this is really important. What I'm experiencing right now, to be completely honest with you, at 3 years off benzodiazepines, I feel worse than I did at 2 years off benzodiazepines. What am I trying to say by that? Am I trying to say that I am having some kind of reemergence of benzo withdrawal? Is this some kind of flare, setback, wave? We've certainly talked here about the non-linear nature of benzo withdrawal, healing and recovery. But what's happening to me right now is 100% something called mast cell activation syndrome, MCAS. I've talked about this before on this channel, but this is really now front and center for me. Mast cell activation syndrome. This is a immune disorder. Mast cells are immune cells. And when your mast cells degranulate, this is the technical term, usually in response to a real threat your immune system is facing, they release chemical mediators. And there's a whole bunch of them. And these chemical mediators can be very useful, but when they're released and there's not actually a real threat, there are all sorts of physical and neurological symptoms that you can experience. Now, at a certain point during my benzo withdrawal, I realized that I was experiencing MCAS. Now, a lot of my symptoms had to do with sinus congestion. You know, my ears would get blocked, my tongue would start itching. There were physical symptoms I was experiencing that were like an allergic reaction. It was only later on that I started to realize that I learned some of the symptoms of MCAS actually overlap with some of the benzo withdrawal symptoms. Most of the time when we're talking about benzo withdrawal, we're talking about our GABA receptors. We're talking about this receptor in our brain that works with a neurotransmitter that acts as our nervous system's handbrake, slows down neural activity. And when we're on benzos for a long time, our brain, unsurprisingly, because it's always trying to move towards homeostasis, starts to decommission some of those GABA receptors because it says, well, we've got these other GABA receptors working so well with the benzodiazepines that we don't need all these GABA receptors now. So you stop taking benzodiazepines, and all of a sudden your brain doesn't have those supercharged GABA receptors, and it realizes, oh, we need to get some of those GABA receptors back. But they've already been decommissioned, sometimes turned into something else entirely. And now you're dealing with this onslaught of sped up neural activity, and you've got no handbrake to slow it down. MCAS can present a lot of the same symptoms that you see in benzo withdrawal. And what makes this even more complicated is that MCAS is potentially triggered by the cessation of benzos. This is not proven. It's just a phenomenon that is remarkable for the number of people that talk about it and experience it. We do know, what is proven, is that benzodiazepines are mast cell stabilizers. I don't know why benzos work on this class of immune cell, but they stabilize our mast cells. They help to prevent mast cells from degranulating. When we stop taking benzodiazepines, some of us seem to have a problem with mast cells that are a bit wonky now. Maybe because there was this artificial stabilization for so long, now they don't know how to handle themselves anymore. Again, there are not scientific papers on this. There's no concrete proof I can offer you here. The other wrench in the works with all of this is that COVID is like an immune system wrecking ball. And there are a lot of people that had COVID that now have problems with their mast cells, that actually have mast cell activation syndrome. A lot of this is only coming to light now as people deal with long COVID and kind of the aftershocks of the pandemic. Things that were not really dealt with in the moment because the focus was 100% on just deaths and emergency room visits in the most severe cases. I had COVID several times. It's possible that my MCAS was caused by COVID. As with many things in life, it's possible that it's not some really neat narrative, all benzo withdrawal or all COVID. It could be a combination of the two. And it's probably something messy like that. Just like it's incredibly messy trying to separate, in my experience of benzo withdrawal, where my symptoms were linked to GABA receptors in their inability or that incredibly long period of time that it takes to rehabilitate those GABA receptors. At what point did my GABA receptors come back online to a point they were functional, and I was noticing more MCAS symptoms? What I do know now is that I can have these waves, these flares, that are linked to MCAS, and I'll tell you why I know that. At a certain point, once I realized I had MCAS, I went on to a low histamine diet, and I started to take a number of supplements after that. Immediately when I went on the low histamine diet, I noticed a dramatic improvement, especially in the symptoms I was experiencing, the sinus congestion, the physical symptoms I was really struggling with. And then I started taking a number of supplements, and the supplements allowed me to reintroduce some foods. So my diet was not as restrictive. What happened to me recently, and I mentioned this in the previous video, is that I got sick. And illness is something that can really throw the MCAS situation out of whack. MCAS is thought to be a chronic condition that doesn't go away. I've still hung on to this pipe dream that mine's going to go away because I thought maybe if it's caused by benzo withdrawal and the longer I stay off benzodiazepines, maybe there's hope that my MCAS is going to go away. That's so far remained a pipe dream. But it's also thought to get progressively worse. In most people, it's a progressive condition that gets worse over time. Most people, their MCAS gets worse over time. It gets more difficult to manage. Now that we do have, not so much, there are some scientific studies now coming out on MCAS, but there are also what I would call like medical pioneers, people that are self-experimenting and charting their own course, just as us with benzo withdrawal, kind of feeling our way through the dark and figuring things out, because the medical community has largely turned a blind eye to it. There are people that have found a way through, not a way through entirely, but a better path to take. And I've mentioned my friend Jody Edinburgh on this channel. I've linked to her MCAS resource page, which I think is the most valuable thing on the internet for anyone with MCAS. But there are resources that have come to light because of people like Jody that are making it much easier to manage. But when you get sick, and this is what happened to me some weeks ago, I had nothing too exceptional in terms of illness, just some kind of cold, or it could have been the latest COVID variant, I don't know. Sore throat, light fever, congestion, pretty typical. But since then, I have had a resurgence of MCAS symptoms, some of which overlap with benzo withdrawal symptoms. And now, there were some foods I was reintroducing, and paired with supplements and antihistamines, I was able to get through okay. Now I've noticed I've had to scale back. I've had to restrict my diet once more. And it's only in doing that I've started to see some improvement. The reason I'm sharing this with you all is because there are a lot of people who are dealing with benzo withdrawal that are not paying any attention to the possibility of MCAS. And even beyond the benzo withdrawal people, there are a lot of people that might be dealing with MCAS symptoms because the symptoms are not universally experienced. My set of symptoms may not be the same as yours. And there's a long list of possible symptoms, depending on the chemical mediators that are released and depending on how we react to them. There's a point where you don't want to put, I know this especially from benzo withdrawal and the forums and some of these online spaces, you don't want to put too many things in front of people because their brain might start doing some of the work, some of the damage for them. Our brain is this incredibly imaginative engine. And yes, we can read about things. Dr. Google used to do this to me all the time. We can read about symptoms in different things and start thinking that we're experiencing them. There's this incredible power of suggestion, and especially when we're going through things like benzo withdrawal, we can actually have what feels like a physical manifestation of these symptoms, even though they might not be there. But on the flip side of that, there are times when there's actually a physical mechanism. There's something that's taking place. For example, we're eating certain foods and we're not taking antihistamines. In my case, I'm not taking antihistamines and supplements. And all of a sudden I'm having this reaction, but I'm not putting two and two together. And I was just having the same reaction over and over and over again. And the allergic reaction stuff, the congestion, all of that, made it really easy to see. But there were some other things I was experiencing that I just chalked up to benzo withdrawal. There are some symptoms and things that people might be experiencing that could be because of this mechanism. And I just think they should try to shine a little light on it and see, just to make sure. I'm not trying to scare anyone with this. What is astonishing, though, is that there's a lot of stuff coming to light recently, just now, about our immune cells and their link with neurological conditions and disorders and psychiatric conditions and disorders. Just recently, there was several things published about microglia. These are immune cells that are in our brain, in our central nervous system, in our spine. How these immune cells might be linked to neuropsychiatric conditions. And yesterday, I'm reading about a woman who, as she's being treated for lymphoma with chemotherapy, her schizophrenia all of a sudden disappears. And they're thinking that it's possible for a certain number of people, schizophrenia and possibly some other neurodegenerative and neuropsychiatric conditions might actually be autoimmune conditions more than anything else. And then I have this study. This study that just recently came out, that's going to be published, I think, in October 2025. And this study looked at the prevalence of neurologic disorders and psychiatric disorders amongst MCAS patients. So neurologic disorders, it looked at fatigue, cognitive dysfunction, fainting or near fainting, migraine-like headaches, muscle pain, tenderness, weakness, pain, numbness, tingling in extremities, restless leg syndrome, seizure-like activity, insomnia, sleep attacks, tinnitus, I still prefer saying tinnitus, acoustic startle, Tourette's syndrome, resting tremor, and light, sun, pain, odors, scents, noise, hypersensitivity. You ready now for the psychiatric disorders? Anxiety, agoraphobia, panic attacks, depression, bipolar depression, mania, hypomania, psychosis, schizophrenia, hallucinations, obsessive-compulsive disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, anger management problems, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal thoughts, and eating disorders. Across the board, MCAS patients, amongst females and males. It was higher for females than males, but across the board for both females and males, they all reported higher rates of all of these neurologic and psychiatric disorders. There was part of me before that would have never believed I could have a panic attack at 3 a.m. because of spaghetti and tomato sauce I had for dinner. And before I knew that, honestly, I was flying blind. What's crazy about all of this is that, talking about something like seizure-like activity, I'm going to be talking more about akathisia. My next video, in fact, talking about something akathisia, my first experience with akathisia. But akathisia, benzo withdrawal, it's really easy to comprehend, because it's like on the spectrum of neural activity, it's like we have anxiety kind of over here. It's like our neural activity's speeding up a little bit, and on the far end we have a seizure, and it's like akathisia is like right here, right before the seizure, and then maybe restless leg syndrome is here. You wouldn't think that our immune cells could possibly have anything to do with this, and now it seems like they might. It seems like they do. I'm just getting out of the sun a little bit here because there's like 10 different shadows going across my face. Hope you can still see me now. this video is a little update kind of on what I've been going through recently, but hopefully it's also maybe for someone else a bit of motivation to take a look at some of this stuff. Obviously, there are plenty of people that don't have mast cell activation syndrome and that still experience some of these symptoms. There's plenty of people that have benzo withdrawal that probably don't have mast cell activation syndrome. But then there are those of us that do and that are experiencing some of these things because of MCAS. And if you don't know it, sometimes some of the symptoms are not totally debilitating. And you know, if sometimes some of the symptoms are on the psychiatric side or the neurologic side, but not totally debilitating, you might attribute them to something else, and just kind of keep white knuckling your way through life. When there is this possible solution, even if it's not a solution that is, you know, the most agreeable thing in the world. You know, because for some of us it might mean restricting our diet, it might mean taking supplements, might be, I mean, I've been on antihistamines now for, I don't know, 2.5 years. But the alternative is worse for me. The alternative is worse. Anyway, that's my talk for the day. I have been able to wrangle this thing a little bit better in the past. I'll say in the past 3-4 days, I've finally been able to string multiple days together, and that is encouraging. So a lot of this stuff is about stabilization, and once you get to a place where things are stable, then it's like your margin for error gets a little bit bigger. But when you're not stable, your margin for error is razor thin. So hopefully in the next video I'll be telling you about I don't want to say how good I've been feeling, but how I've been managing, how manageable it's been. Don't want to get my hopes up. Anyway, I hope you're doing okay, and I hope you have a good day today. See you soon.